Welcome to Investing by the Books, a podcast by Redeye. I'm your host, Eddie Palmgren, and with me in the studio is my colleague Niklas Sävås. And today comes another episode where we talk with a fund manager about a book of their choice. So Niklas, who is our guest this time?
We have the great pleasure to introduce Erik Sprinchorn, who is a portfolio manager at TIN Fonder in Stockholm. Erik has been a portfolio manager for over 25 years at various firms and launched TIN Fonder in 2019 together with Carl Armfelt. Together, they had a very successful spell at Swedbank Robur, co-managing their technology fund. And TIN Fonder has two funds. TIN Ny Teknik invests in technology, health, and digital brands with a focus on the Nordic market, while the second fund, TIN World Tech, has a global mandate. Erik, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much.
So you've been in the business for a long time. How did your passion for investing start?
Well, I had the good fortune to be born in a country with a strong equity culture, I would say. I mean, that certainly helped. I did my first feeble steps as a speculator in the mid-'80s. And then I luckily sold everything, all the 5 stocks that I owned just before entering into conscription, which was mandatory back then. And I felt like a genius in October '87, having sold just before. And that sort of impacted my confidence. And I thought I can make a living from this eventually.
Nice. And how about the reading part? When did that start?
I think I had another great fortune to be able to read and write really early. Not so much books at an early age, more like comics. But eventually, when I went into university doing finance, the whole topic of behavioral finance was completely missing at that time. It was all about the Homo economicus and the rational man and rational decisions, and so I'm basically self-taught in the behavioral arena, and reading a lot of books on the topic has certainly helped. It's not. I do like to read a lot. I had some kind of idea that one third of the books would be in about human nature, one third finance in general, and 1/3 more general fiction. It hasn't worked out perfectly, but at least I have a number of interesting book under my belt.
Nice. And which book have you chosen for us today?
I've chosen one of the most influential books on my thinking all time. It's 15 years old, but still very relevant. And it's called Mistakes Were Made, But Not by Me.
Why did you choose that one?
Well, it touches so many aspects of how we as human beings think and act and the mistakes that we make. I think mistakes is a topic of its own, especially in fund management and in a very measurable activity. We tend to think that we make mistakes all the time. How do we react on our own mistakes? How do we view other people's mistakes, and so forth? So it's an interesting topic, and it cuts. Dissonance theory is perhaps has been known for a long time. I certainly even in high school I learned about dissonance reduction. The marketing people were always faster to learn about human psychology and formalize it and use it in their marketing communication. And you just bought this car. It's a great car. Congratulations! It looks great. So I mean that's typical dissonance reduction, and it plays into our human. Unthinking effort to like a thermostat to keep a dissonance level low. We want to be internally consistent. I'm a smart person. I make a mistake. I mean, that doesn't rhyme. I mean, I need to sort of justify myself a little bit. So mistakes were made, but somebody else did it. It's very natural, but it's also it can be very dangerous. So it's good to be aware of it and try to put it in your sort of forehead before your eyes, and you can't think about it all the time, but it can certainly help you in many areas. And everything from science to law and order and politics and marriage. I mean, relations. The tendency for us humans to use self-justification is a dangerous trap in many areas.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I mean, one of the authors who are really prolific in this is, of course, Robert Cialdini, with his influence from the 70s. That, I mean, he didn't write it for marketing people, but those were the ones embracing it.
Yeah.
Who are the authors of this book?
They're called Tavris and Elliot Aronson. I don't know any of them much about either of them, specifically. I just know that they wrote this book and did it well, sort of in a collaborative effort.
Great. Can you tell us a little bit more about the story? What's the book about, more in detail?
Well, if you sort of follow the plot sort of chapter by chapter, they in the intro they go through some examples how we disassociate ourselves from mistakes, and then they go through the whole dissonance theory which is the engine behind self-justification. A lot of examples. Theses such as believing is seeing, not the reverse. If I believe this thing, then I see only things corroborating that view. And one central aspect of dissonance theory is what they call the pyramid of choice. And I think it's we can sort of stop there and think about that, because I think it's the essential for the whole book. I mean, the three of us can be almost at the exact same point at the top of the pyramid. But say one of us takes a little nudge in one direction and the others take a nudge towards the other direction. And then we self-justify those choices and all the way down until we're diametrically opposed in terms of politics, or if it's in relation to one another, or so it's a very that mechanic is what really is dangerous about the dissonance. And then going from there, they talk about the blind spots, how we use self-justification and dissonance avoidance as fish use water. Basically, it's so natural for us. It's unseen. We don't even know we're doing it, and that makes it even harder to sort of overcome or change. Then memory works the same way. It's the justifying historian, they call it. Of course, we can't trust our own memories either. And then they go through some of the most important examples and areas where self-justification is an influence in science, law and disorder. I mean, the whole history of people being imprisoned for the wrong reasons, interrogators being self-justified in how they, even if DNA evidence shows that this person is innocent, they still believe in the confession they got, and that's more important than the DNA evidence.
Yeah, the police who says, I never interrogate innocent people.
Yeah, exactly. And then from a personal perspective, self-justification in marriage and a relationship, I mean, that's a particular interest, because, I mean, yes, I'm a fund manager. I try to do the best I can as a professional, but, my other life is equally or even more important, right? And I would say that it's not just in marriage or in relationships, but in parenthood. I think this book can really help if you read it and take some of it on board. And of course, the whole dissonance is prevalent in politics and war and conflict, and especially where there is some kind of status involved. It reinforces self-justification, makes people even less likely to own up to mistakes, and because it doesn't look good. So the more public you are, the more status you have, the more likely you will fall into the dissonance theory traps. And then a solution towards the end. What do you do? Let go, own up, which is easy to say but hard to do. But if you truly realize you made a mistake, it hurts. But then if to own up and to also makes it possible to let go of that mistake and move on. And interestingly, people who do that are often very well received by whoever sees or hears it. We love those people. So it's admitting to mistakes it comes natural to us as investors, right? Because we're exposed to mistakes so many times. Perhaps we get inured. Perhaps we get better at owning up to mistakes than the general public. I don't know.
Yeah, there's many examples of different biases in the book, and like marriage, for example, can also be applied in that way. Many people say, "Oh, I'm married to this stock," and so on. So
yeah.
But which biases are most common for you, do you say, when you're investing?
The really hard one is, of course, loss aversion. How would you ever try to get around that? I mean, it really hurts when something goes down, but it being aware of that and in some way, the whole issue of behavioral finance is so almost, you can call it a lost cause in a way, because it's my metaphor for it is the driverless vehicles, autonomous driving is first people are really afraid. It won't work. I will die. And second phase, they're amazed. This actually works. And the third and final phase, it's really boring because this computer is so law-abiding and slow. And it's same for us, or for me as an investor. Learning about Tversky and Kahneman and the studies and how all these biases. It filled me with dread. Oh, I've been so stupid. A lot of dissonance at that very point. But then phase two, resolution. I will defeat my biases, and then sort of resigning to the fact that some of these things are hardwired, and you have to sort of find coping strategies around them. And I think I've found relatively successful coping strategies around loss aversion. But it's something that is the first and foremost of all biases in the investing world, I think. What do you think?
I agree. And I mean, if you listen to Munger, he says he's studied this his whole life. And I mean, for example, he talks a lot about the problems with incentives, and he always underestimated. I mean, even though of his 98 years, I think.
Yeah.
So I was thinking also that, I mean, investing is a game of probabilities, and a bad outcome does not necessarily equal a mistake. So I'm curious to know first, how do you define a mistake as an investor?
Well, I'm a chess player, so I have a little. In chess, there are levels of mistakes. Yeah, you can commit an error, not the very best move, and then you can make a mistake, which is a little more serious, and then you can make blunders, which are more terminal to a game of chess. So I guess risk management step one is sort of trying to avoid blunders. Set yourself. That's the formation of an investment strategy or of investment philosophy. And one circle of competence, if you want to go Buffett, but it's don't do anything outside of what you said you were going to do, right? Then within that, what is a mistake? What is an error? I think we can, given the volatility of the stock market, we certainly expose ourselves to daily errors. I think, our funds have performed really well over a very long time. We still have, positive outcomes on a daily basis, maybe 52% of the time. That means 48% errors, if you will. If you interpret a negative outcome on a daily basis as an error. Take loss aversion, 2.5 times more psychological pain of a loss than a gain, and you calculate minus 2.5 times 0.48 plus 0.52. You say we're constantly unhappy, right? But doing that calculation, it makes the whole loss aversion on a daily basis a little bit ridiculous, and that helps to think in those terms. So because you said investing is a game of probabilities. Well, the problem is that those probabilities are not known.
Exactly.
It's not a casino.
Yeah, and it's also all the positions that you didn't take in the fund and you see soaring, and you also have the mistakes of omission.
FOMO, regret, it's all there.
Yeah.
So I think you mentioned some advice that the authors offer, but I mean, in terms of actions you can implement as an investor, do you have any examples of that?
Well, I think you still need to, despite this being aware of the dissonance theory, the risk of self-justification, all the blind spots, all the biases that can lead a person to think, we don't know anything about anything, and that idea, that sentiment is I think it seems it's rather fashionable, especially among the really smart hedge fund managers. They can at least profess, we don't know anything, do we? But I think that philosophical route leads to some apathy and nihilism at worst. So I think you need to make an effort to actually achieve something. So you have to have strong opinions. But back to Mr. Munger, strong but malleable. I mean, we need to make decisions, and we need to be able and resolute in making decisions. So we need, and that's also why I don't like this. Some people use the Dunning-Kruger, but the supreme confidence without knowing anything. I can. It's useful as a mental model, but I still think that people need to be resolute. I mean, you have to succumb to some of these biases in being resolute. Otherwise, you won't achieve anything. But then, mastering cognitive dissonance and self-justification and avoiding that, then owning up to your mistakes as you go along making them, then you actually learn from those mistakes. And mistakes are really important. I used to be a sports coach, and I distinctly remember one practice where some of the teammates we had one individual exercise which was done, and the other team members were sort of jeering, and sort of before the important moment actually pre-called it error, wrong thing, doing it badly, whatever. And if it made me furious. I had to stop the training and then do a little speech. So if we can't allow our teammates to make mistakes during practice, how can we ever excel in a match, right? And I think that goes for life itself too. I mean, we need to give ourselves the opportunity to make mistakes, and owning up to the fact that we do make mistakes, and owning up to, I mean, it's not that hard. It doesn't hurt so much to say, I made an error, I made a mistake. It's actually, I mean, it shouldn't be such level of dissonance doing that. I mean, I think that's the real message from this book, that you can, learn, take value from.
Yeah, and when we're facing all those decisions, one thing that I found interesting with this book, and a really fascinating part, was the part about memory. Mm-hmm. And one woman, for example, expressing like fond memories of her father reading a certain book for her as a child, and then she found out later in life that, oh, actually the book was published 1 year after her father died.
Yeah.
So she was like, this is not, and that's the dissonance that you're talking about when things don't make sense. But as an investor, like to learn, do you have any, like, do you write down in the moment, or do you have a diary or any way to like for all your decisions that you make?
I have to admit, I'm not that structured. I do enjoy reading and learning, but I don't internalize it very as a good student, writing journals and things. Other than the sort of little book writing project that I'm engaged in, it's. I think I try to internalize the most important things about from the books I read, and I guess some books are more prominent in my memory, my false memory, and this is certainly one of them.
And is this like a book that you reread every now and then? Because otherwise, I can imagine that you read it and then you remember it and then you.
Yeah, I mean, the whole rereading is something that I need to do more of. One example is I guess we all read Fooled by Randomness.
Yeah.
Can you recall reading it the first time, feeling perhaps Taleb being slightly arrogant in his tone?
Definitely. I actually read The Black Swan first.
Yeah. Okay.
So I think I had that realization with that.
But the thing, Fooled by Randomness is one of the few books I've read several times. And, reading it the second time, it's not just, it wasn't just, oh, he's so right, but so arrogant. The second time was, oh, he's so right.
Mm.
But is that because you are suffering from this?
Disliking tendency, I think they call it.
Who knows? Who knows? But rereading is a good thing. I mean, everybody should do that more, given all the time that we all have, right?
Yeah, it's definitely but it's also a question about, I mean, how much you take in from a book and what actions, as we say, what actions you implement. Maybe in this type of book, it's more of getting the awareness, or for some it may be start to write the diary. For others, it may be using a devil's advocate, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Do you follow short sellers, for example, in the companies you follow, if there are short sellers in those?
Oh, in some cases there are short sellers, and in terms of following, not following them on Twitter, I assume, but more trying to read about their investment philosophy.
Exactly.
Yeah. Not usually. Perhaps I should do more, but I think we certainly have a sort of a positive tendency. Rather than, and it's hard to be. I've been shorting stocks in my career earlier as well. It's a completely different sentiment and mentality that you need to apply, and it's hard to do the. I think someone needs to focus, be either a short seller or a long position person. So I haven't spent too much time on. It's not a very usual. Very common to have large short positions in the companies in which we invest. When it happens, I mean, people can take different views. And is it really important why they took a short position? Is it? I mean, most of the time, it's shorting Embracer and buying Ubisoft. It's a pairs trading affair. The time when it becomes more acute or to learn more is when you have these short seller reports published. Then we need to take a look at those, because more often than not, they're let's say not completely fact based.
Yeah, so something that is really hard is to really decide when you know enough to make the decision, right? How do you know when you know enough, like that you don't put too much effort into an idea? Otherwise you can look at it forever and never buy it, and that's what you talked about before.
Yeah, the procrastination and sort of nihilistic trap, if you will. And it's funny that we should perhaps invent here a bias that comes from trying to avoid all biases by admitting that you don't know anything.
Exactly.
Comes the avoid or the apathy bias.
But are
you
you
will be the inventor.
You know, one thing actually came up when I reread this book was an example from local politics. You can cut this if you don't want it in this kind of format, but we had our minister Morgan Johansson sort of changing a direction on one issue, namely having language abilities as a prerequisite for citizenship. And you know, he 10 years earlier, I take a neutral point on politics here, just looking at the thing itself and how it applies to what the book says. He has a history of his blog 10 years ago. He called those people calling for the same thing. He basically called them Nazis, right? Now when it's okay. I mean, in essence, it's okay to change your mind. It has to be okay for politicians to change their minds. They shouldn't be married to their positions, right? But he really missed an opportunity. Instead of erasing his blog post, what if he had owned up to those, called them mistakes, said, look, we're all human. I did these things 10 years ago. I'm sorry, and I've apologized to the people involved. Now it's time to look at this fresh, and this is my new view. I think he would have sort of neutralized all the sniding comments. He would have become much more popular. He could even have challenged the apparent heir Magdalena Andersson as a leader for the Social Democratic Party. I mean, I think that's an interesting example how you can apply these things: being humble, owning up to mistakes, and be seen in a more positive light, even as a sort of top-level politician.
Yeah, it's really an actual example of, many similar examples in the book, actually. I mean, Trump is quite frequently mentioned, for example.
Or maybe you have a new edition.
Yeah,
because
they released one in 2020.
Yeah,
so that's the third one.
So I didn't read anything about Trump in this book from 2006.
Yeah, no, he's mentioned quite frequently for a reason, and I agree. I mean, I think we would have a better society if we had those leaders who really don't self-justify.
And I mean, I guess you can look at social media is not an evil in itself, but it's a nice lubricant to slide it down the pyramid of choice. You know, it quickens that process quite a bit.
You mean that we are following the people that we want to follow and that have the same opinion that we have, and
well, it's a sort of auto nudge ourselves into going down the slope of the pyramid of choice.
Yeah, and that we never seek out this confirming evidence.
Unless, of course, if we've read the book and know those things, and
right,
actively seek out challenging views.
Yeah, we did talk with Heather Brilliant and Krishna Mohanrai from Diamond Hill Capital Management in episode 5, and Krishna said that in their fund they work with like when they see a company producing a result or something, they take 1 week before they do any action. So they want to cut out any emotional response and just want to wait and then make a rational decisions after.
Mm-hmm.
How do you act with that? Because I feel like the markets are moving so fast. And
yeah, I've heard. I mean, there are versions of that rule. If you meet the management, sit on your hands for 3 days, etc. I mean, there are different practical rules to sort of cut out emotional aspects of decisions. We don't have very few sort of strong checklist like rules in our investments. I guess one would be sort of, if fraud, get out unceremoniously, as quickly as possible. That's one of very few sort of rules like that we use.
Another angle is to study which businesses that have taken steps actually to mitigate the bad effects of cognitive dissonance, such as Buffett ordering his managers to give him the bad news first, and Bezos on accepting failures in innovation. Have you seen similar characteristics in businesses you have followed over the years?
I think that fund management is like we started is a business where you're so exposed to optical mistakes that these things tend to become important in management. Often, have to say, in a bad way. So fund management companies can really impact their success or failure by being cognizant of their tolerance of mistakes. So that's an example. Any business that's project oriented. I think particularly about computer games. The games business is one where you have a lot of games failing, a lot of games taking longer time to complete. I think those companies are particularly aware of these issues. I'm not aware of great soundbite examples of management that like the examples that you put up, but I think
set the bar high.
Yeah, I know. I mean, but I think companies and business models that are exposed to these kind of problems, they're probably better at handling them.
So, I mean, as you more or less alluded to, some CEOs have a lot of ego and tell you what you think you want to hear. And how do you avoid getting fooled by them?
Ooh.
$1 million question.
Yeah. Meeting them frequently, trying to meet more people in the same company, getting different aspects, meeting their competitors, meeting their customers, meeting their suppliers, taking the ecosystem view. I think those are some useful ways to try, because I mean, the CEO role sort of selects for charismatic individuals who you're easily influenced by, and that's the whole point of them being there, right? So it is something that we need to be aware of and guard ourselves against.
I was also thinking about another aspect, and that's, I mean, technology companies, I mean, in your sphere, they come with solutions that have the potential to mitigate effects of flawed wiring, such as dissonance, for example. And that's one example is AI doctors who, I mean, use the actual data and not maybe their subjective views first, because typically as humans we start with our subjective views and not the objective, the facts. So I'm curious to know your take on the role technology will play in the years to come within healthcare or other areas.
We like to make decisions on sort of first principles, our own data, our own analysis. We don't want to be dependent on somebody else's views. I mean, that's the first comment, I think. And with respect to technology in our firm, we actually use it to try to gather unstructured data, which is sort of crawling the internet, basically, trying to find data which we structure and visualize and use in combination with company visits. So if the company says A and the data says B, then we get some kind of neutral, unbiased data, which is not, we don't use it to sort of forecast the next quarter, but it's more of a health check. Is the company franchise developing in a long-term positive way? Are clients happy? Are communities thriving? Are they engaged? Those sort of things. So that's one aspect how we use it.
And on more on the company side, the companies you actually invest in, how do they? I mean, do they have, for example, as I mentioned, with AI doctors using data to come up with probabilities of a disease based on symptoms. So say that you have these 5 symptoms and you would enter them, and based on the data, number 1 in terms of the disease comes up, and number 2 and number 3.
Yeah.
And then the doctor could look at that and see, okay, but in this specific example, I think I've seen this as well, which is not in the data. And I say, okay, number 2 is more relevant in this case. So I think it's number 2. Is that okay? Because I know that you have healthcare companies in your sector, and I'm not an expert on that. So it would be interesting to hear your take on, I mean, is that what we're going to in healthcare? Or
I think the marriage between biology and compute is a massive promise for the future. I think the best example of that are the vaccines. I mean, historically, it's taken 9 years to come up with a new vaccine. These ones took 9 months.
Unfortunately, people are skeptic about that. People think that, it went too fast. So how can it? And I always tell them that it's
technology.
Exactly.
It's the compounded effect of years of science behind this. mRNA technology. And I think it's mind-boggling to think about the fact you don't use the traditional way of taking the virus, hitting it with a club, and sort of trying to find the a good cure for it, and then putting it back, cultivating it in eggs and then put it back into humans. This is more okay. So this is the genetic makeup of a virus. This is what the AI has told us is the matchup and the antibody, and then printing that antibody, that spike protein. I mean, that it's such a revolution, and it's a good example of what to come in the future. I'm very optimistic, given our investment philosophy that we want to invest in profitable growth companies. I don't think we will be participating in the most cutting research projects, because they will still be binary. Of course, the fund could have made a lot of money in Moderna, but it was never in our investment sort of. We stayed in our circle of competence and in our risk mandate, if you will. But I think there will be plenty of opportunities in Nordic niche companies, especially the ones who can act as sell their picks and shovels to the gold diggers. And these new technologies will expand the whole market and pave the way for true personalized medicine, which is I'm so happy to be alive.
Yeah, it's very interesting to follow. And as this book has many lessons from an investor perspective, we have seen here, which they don't mention almost any such examples in the book, but it's interesting how much you can really relate a book and then put it in this kind of context. But you also mentioned in the beginning a bit about like how important it is in a personal way. Mm-hmm. How has this book changed your way of that, like normal living?
Well, it's certainly changed my attitude in general towards admitting mistakes, owning up to mistakes, and seeing that as a virtue. And I mean, it's possible to change via value systems. Who am I? If I identify as a person who owns up to my mistakes, I will own up to more mistakes. That's the trick, I think.
Yeah, I think it's easy to see in a marriage. Like, I mean, just if you get why didn't you clean the dishes? And you say, I'm really, really sorry. I mean, you really take responsibility. That would be causing you to have a better life, I think, on a daily basis. If you just admit and do it early.
Yeah.
And I also thought about friendship, and there was a really good quote with when a friend makes a mistake, the friend remains a friend, and then the mistake remains a mistake.
Exactly.
I really like that, how you separate
Yeah.
the person and the action, and that comes from...
Another very practical takeaway from the book. If you want somebody to think better of you, ask for their help in something.
Yeah, exactly. There was the Benjamin Franklin, right? Asking for a book.
Yes.
From his worst enemy.
Exactly.
Yeah, and then when he got it, they established a relationship, and then things went from there. So you can use this dissonance in a positive way as well.
Yeah.
And really, for me, it was also a lot about this open-mindedness and take time to reflect. And I think we talked about this in episode 2 with Jake Taylor, how stressed we all are, and that we don't have, like, we're going on a hike or a walk, and we always have something in our ears and listening to something or distracting ourselves. So we never
pod,
really...
for instance.
Yeah, exactly. So you should be selective which podcast you listen to. But how do you deal with that, like solitude and having time off?
I like the pod medium a lot, and perhaps I listen too much, and I've been more actively trying to do nothing of late, because just filling every activity with some information flowing through your ears is not really helpful for creative thought. So I'm all in your camp there, trying to find solitude and boredom and trying to think independent thoughts.
Yeah, and how do you do that? Like practically, do you go away from the city, or do you shut off your phone certain hours, or?
I go to the gym. I take walks to in the mornings. I have the option to take a 30-minute walk down to a commuter ferry. That's extremely useful for that sort of thing.
Yeah, because especially as an investor, you're always, and you have investments all over the world, so there's always some market that is open probably, and some news coming out, and
some bad news coming out.
That as well, and they always hurt more. So thank you so much for coming on the podcast, Erik, and I really liked the book choice. It was a very good one. Do you have something else you would like to highlight from the book that we have not talked about?
I think we've talked about the most important things. I mean, it's never we should never divulge the whole thing, right? I mean, reading the book and forming one's own opinion about it is God's work.
And before we finish up, do you have any other book recommendations related to this topic?
Certainly, anything by Taleb. Right. So let's perhaps start with Fooled by Randomness, the book we talked about earlier.
Yeah, I think I love The Black Swan as well. So there you have two.
Anti-Fragile is super too.
Okay. Read all his books. And where can our audience follow you?
You can. Best way is to go to tinfonder.se and subscribe to the monthly letter, or follow me and Carl on Twitter, Sprinchorn and Karmfeld.
Perfect. We'll put that in the show notes.
Cool.
Thank you so much.
Cheers. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to Investing by the Books, a podcast by Redeye. You can follow us on Twitter at @IB_Redeye and email us at ib.podcast@redeye.se. To improve the podcast, we really appreciate your feedback, so please rate and review us. Notice that the content in this podcast is not and shall not be construed as investment advice. This information is meant to be informative and for general purposes only. For full disclaimer, visit redeye.se. For the editing of this podcast, we thank John Hintze, and for the graphic design, Jesper Viking. I'm your host, Eddie Palmgren, and until next time, I sincerely wish you the best of luck on your journey through life and investing.